Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this right here is the healthiest half hour anywhere online today. Appreciate you joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. So here's what's coming up on the program today. Our goal is one thing and one thing only, and that is to help you live a longer and healthier life. And to do that, we're going to be looking at a new study that could, in fact, be a breakthrough in longevity. Dr. Hana Kahleova has details on one particular nutrient of interest. Dr. Kahleova, this is fascinating stuff. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Chuck.
And Dr. Vanita Rahman, she will be here with us as well. She's going to be taking a look at her native country of India, where coronavirus cases are exploding, far surpassing anything like we have seen here in the States. So what is going on? What can be done? Dr. Rahman will have some answers for us. Thank you so very much for joining us today, Dr. Rahman. And she's going to be reaching into the doctor's mailbag to pull out one of your questions as well. Going to be prescribing an answer live on the show for us. So if there is something weighing on your mind, go ahead and post that in the comments section. Now we'll be getting you an answer a little bit later on in the broadcast. But before we go any further, let's get caught up on what is happening in the world. Here are your health headlines for Thursday, September 17th, 2020. And we do start by getting an updated look at the coronavirus numbers. Nearly 40,000 new infections reported Wednesday in the U.S., bringing the country's total caseload now to nearly 6.6 million. This as more than 1,200 COVID-19 deaths were also reported. Nearly 197,000 Americans have now lost their lives. India, meanwhile, is the current global epicenter for the virus, reporting almost 100,000 new cases on Wednesday, as it's overtaken Brazil for the second highest total number of cases of any country in the world. Still, though, 1.5 million behind the U.S. Need these for the next story. It turns out 4 eyes could be better than 2 for preventing coronavirus infections. A small Chinese study finds just 6% of patients hospitalized for COVID-19 in the province of Hubei wore glasses to correct nearsightedness. That compares to more than 31% of the general population. The virus has been shown to enter the body through the eyes, and researchers believe those who wear glasses for at least 8 hours a day are less likely to touch their eyes with their hands and thus cause an infection. Studies have shown people do touch their eyes about 10 times an hour without even thinking about it. Scientists, though, still say more research is needed. And finally, unhealthy foods are known to cause chronic disease, and now researchers in the UK have taken that a step further, demonstrating that people who eat a diet with poor nutritional scores have higher rates of preventable diseases such as heart disease and cancer. The European Union uses a Nutri-Score system where food packaging is color-coded based on its nutritional value, with green being healthier and orange being more unhealthy. The study of more than 500,000 adults finds those who scored the lowest, had the lowest quality of diet, had the highest rates of preventable disease. Researchers say clearer nutrition labels could help shoppers make healthier decisions. Let's move on now. Who doesn't want to live a longer and healthier life? The average American will live to the ripe old age of 78 and a half. That is well below the 84 and a half trips around the sun taken by residents of Japan. And even our neighbors to the north in Canada live about 4 years longer than we do. So how can we bridge that gap? Well, a new study is zeroing in on one particular nutrient that is found in abundance in the standard American diet. And no, I am not talking about fat. This is an essential amino acid that you probably have never even heard of. It's called methionine. And here now to tell us about it and why, although essential, it may be cutting short our golden years, is Dr. Hana Kahleova. She is the Director of Clinical Research here at the Physicians Committee. Dr. Kahleova, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm super excited about sharing this study with you. What's the secret to longevity? Let me share my screen with you.
Everybody wants to live longer and healthier.
Absolutely.
Dr. Kahleova, when you brought this to my attention. So let's dial up the study and see what we can get into today.
As you mentioned, Chuck, the age and longevity and life expectancy is different in different parts of the world, and even in different parts of the US. And there's a few areas in the world that are called the blue zones, where people live the longest and are the healthiest on Earth. And one of them is in Loma Linda, California. So we can even learn, within the United States. We don't have to travel to Japan. And one thing these blue zones have in common is that their diet is very much plant-based. They eat a lot of plant-based foods, a whole food plant-based diet. And another common trait is that in these blue zones, people don't usually snack. They only eat 3 meals a day, and sometimes they even skip a meal time to time. They usually skip dinner. Sometimes people eat only 2 meals a day, only breakfast and lunch. And so what do a plant-based diet and intermittent fasting have in common? It's methionine restriction. Methionine is an amino acid that contains sulfur together with cysteine. It's one of the essential amino acids that we need in our diet. However, a Western diet has a complete excess of methionine, and we even talk about methionine toxicity, how much methionine we consume on an average American diet. And as you can see, the main sources of methionine are found in different kinds of meat, beef, poultry, lamb, but also fish and seafood, pork, and dairy and eggs. So once you eliminate these, once you switch over to a plant-based diet, you will still be consuming methionine, but not in these toxic levels. You will be consuming exactly how much you need. And that's exactly the topic of a new paper, methionine restriction induced longevity. So if we restrict the methionine, the amount of methionine that we consume in our diet, this seems to be associated with longevity. Now, why is it? What are the mechanisms? First of all, methionine restriction improves glucose and insulin signaling, and also reduces the secretion of IGF-1 in the liver. IGF-1 is a protein that has been associated with an increased risk of cancer. So by reducing IGF-1, you are reducing your risk of cancer. And more profound effects are seen in all cells in our body. Methionine restriction improves oxidative stress, which is the underlying cause of aging and all the chronic diseases. So methionine restriction takes care of oxidative stress. It reduces the production of oxidative stress in mitochondria. It improves oxidative stress resistance of the cells. And it also improves the immune function. So I'd like to encourage all of you to give a plant-based diet a try. And if you want even bring it further and boost your methionine restriction even further, then the best way is to skip your dinner today or have an earlier dinner to restrict your eating window and have a longer night fast. Thank you for your attention.
No, thank you, Dr. Kahleova. That's really interesting. Methionine, this one never really popped up on my radar until you did send this study. So I'm curious, how much should we be getting on the average day here? Like, what level is safe, and then what is the toxicity level?
Right. So we're looking at super small doses in these essential amino acids that we need. Sometimes the need for amino acids and for protein in general is overrated. We know that on an average day, we only need about half a gram per kilogram of weight of all the amino acids. And an average American eats 2 or sometimes even 3 times more. And it's true also about methionine. An average American eats, several times more than what we need. So once we switch over to a plant-based diet, we still get plenty. That's why there's still room. If you'd like to try intermittent fasting, you will not, suffer from a lack of methionine. You will still get enough.
Yeah, I find it so interesting that the plant-based diet here would obviously be a factor in getting less methionine in your diet. And then I think back to some of the other statistics that we've seen in previous studies that show that vegans and vegetarians, by and large, do live longer lives than those who eat the standard American diet. And I always just kind of attributed that to the lack of heart disease
Right.
and cancer, the lower risks there. But then you can dive a little deeper with this kind of study,
Exactly.
and well, maybe that's not happening because of methionine.
Yeah, it's exactly like it's a novel mechanism behind longevity, and it's definitely in addition to the other benefits of a plant-based diet. It's not that methionine is the only thing that matters in your diet, but it's in addition to having a lower consumption of cholesterol and saturated fat and all that stuff.
It all kind of works together. Dr. Kahleova, thank you so very much for your time. This has been fascinating.
Thank you, Chuck.
All right. The word of the day, methionine. Okay, time now to turn our attention back to the coronavirus. India is in the midst of a surge of COVID-19 infections that dwarfs anything previously seen anywhere in the world. Indeed, the world's most populous country, now averaging more than 93,000 cases every day. That's nearly 30,000 more than the height of the pandemic here in the US. So, what is going on? And more importantly, what can be done to help flatten that curve? With insight here now is Dr. Vanita Rahman, who actually immigrated from India before attending school here in the US. Dr. Rahman, thanks so very much for joining us. I think your mic is muted, Dr. Rahman. Eh, wait,
You are
there it is.
right. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So we hear numbers like 93,000 cases every day. That's so many more than we've had here in the States. Really kind of alarming.
It is, but we also need to remember India is one of the most populous countries in the world. They have over 1.3 billion persons. And so the statistics are there have been over 5 million cases of COVID-19 diagnosed and about 80,000 deaths. And that's roughly 1,000 deaths a day they're experiencing. Fortunately, the mortality rate from the infections has been low. It's been around 1.6%. So, it's lower than we've seen in some other European countries. So it's really hard to know what to make of that. And it may even be lower. There may be more people that are infected that haven't been tested yet. But there are a lot of things factoring into why the rates of infection are so high. The sheer number of people that live there, the healthcare system isn't as advanced as it is in the developed part of the world, like in the US, Europe, or Australia. And not everyone has access to healthcare. And there's overcrowding. People often live in crowded quarters, big families living in a small house. So if one person gets infected, many will get infected. And if for those of us who've been on the streets of India, we know how incredibly crowded it is. Think Times Square. It's like that in most places. So it's very easy once an infection starts for it to really spread quickly.
Do we know about any steps that they have taken as far as maybe lockdowns or mandatory mask wearing, anything along those lines?
They have. So the government did institute a very strict lockdown. They instituted masks. The problem is, like anywhere in the world, it led to very dire economic consequences. And now fatigue is kicking in from that, where people really want to work. They want to get out of their houses. They want some air. And it's becoming harder and harder for people to follow through on these measures. And that's partly contributing. And some people think that India may be on its way to developing herd immunity just with the sheer number of people that are getting infected. So the government is doing what they can. But again, with a developing country, they don't always have the infrastructure to enforce these limits. And the bottom line is people really are suffering dire economic consequences, which is making it much harder to continue with the lockdown.
I'm curious. I have not looked at the numbers all that closely, and if you don't know the answer to this, that's okay too. But obviously, here in the States, we've seen the larger number of infections in major metropolitan areas. Is it the same, do you think, over in India, where maybe the big cities are the ones that are being hardest hit, where more rural areas, meanwhile, are not seeing that same kind of spike?
Yeah, I don't know for sure if we know that information. Some states in India are harder hit than others. But the reality is, in most parts of India, especially in all the major cities, there's a lot of crowding, and even in rural areas. But I don't know if we have the numbers to differentiate the infection rates in the cities versus the rural population right now.
Can you talk about the overall health of the average person who does live in India? I was pulling up life expectancy scores in advance of having Dr. Kahleova on the show today, and I was just blown away at the life expectancy of the typical Indian. It's only 69 years.
Mhm.
Why is it so much shorter there than it is here and elsewhere?
Yeah, so really fascinating what's happening in India. In India, usually life expectancy was limited by communicable diseases, typhoid, pneumonia, uh, tuberculosis. But what we're seeing as India has become more westernized, as people are eating a more westernized diet, not eating as much of their traditional healthy Indian foods, people are moving less because of technology and urbanization, that the rates of non-communicable diseases have skyrocketed, like hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, the same things that are plaguing the West. And so the combination of both communicable diseases are still high in parts of India. And now you have this, before the COVID-19 pandemic, there was another pandemic of these cardiometabolic conditions hitting India. So together, they're bringing down the life expectancy rates. And just to put it in perspective, Chuck, 25% of the Indian population is obese. 90% of the population gets very little or no physical activity on a given day. And the prevalence of diabetes is about 9%. And the estimates are that by the year 2030, 101 million Indians will have diabetes, a staggering number.
It sounds like they're facing many of the same troubles that are plaguing us here in the U.S. And as you said, it can be traced directly back to this standard American diet, that westernized diet. What is the traditional Indian diet? How does that differ from the standard American diet?
Yeah, so my father, who grew up in a rural part of India, describes it perfectly. He says when he was growing up, he lived in a very modest family. They didn't have a lot of money, and they would eat homemade breads or rice without any added oil or butter, and then they would have it with fresh cooked vegetables and legumes, and that was their staple. And then they would have fruits. What does that sound like? That sounds like our power plate that we have at the physicians committee: vegetables, legumes, grains, and fruit. And that's how he grew up. But more and more, what's happening in India is people have started replacing those legumes or vegetables with dairy products or meat products, fish, poultry, and cheese use has really taken off, where traditional Indian foods that didn't have any dairy are now really doused with cheese or butter or heavy cream, just really diluting the benefit of our traditional foods.
Do you remember being struck by how different the diet was here in the States when you immigrated here as a young child compared to what you had been eating back home?
Oh, I do. I do. I was suddenly exposed to all these foods. And can you believe I had never had cheese before? I had had this homemade cheese, but never like a block of cheddar or mozzarella. And I did not like it at all. And I didn't like pizza because it was such a strange taste to me. But like everyone else, I grew to love it and I acquired a taste with time. That's sort of the addictive properties of these foods. Um, but yeah, it was a huge culture shock. It wasn't the food I was used to eating, and I wasn't crazy about it, but I soon grew to love it, unfortunately.
So, talk to me about the program that you're working on right now that will actually help Indians get their health back in order here. Because you just talking about some very scary trends back there, but let's talk about some ways that you're working to reverse said unhealthy trends.
Yeah, so this is really great. We're really excited to launch this program. It is going to be taught entirely in Hindi, which is my native language I grew up speaking. And there's a team of us from the Physicians Committee who will be hosting this. And what we're really doing is inviting people in India and elsewhere that are Hindi speaking to join us. And we're going to discuss how nutrition impacts our health, which has never been more important when we're looking at COVID-19, and really focusing on things that are common in India, like high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and really focusing on how going back to our traditional Indian way of eating can help mitigate some of these comorbidities. And I'm really excited about this. We're actually going to do cooking demos each time so people can see in real time how to prepare these native Indian dishes that most of us grew up eating, but somehow we stopped making them along the way.
Oh man, that's fantastic. So you see that URL right there on your screen, pcrm.org/healthyindia is where you to go to get more information and to register. Also, by the way, Dr. Rahman is available for telemedicine visits at the Barnard Medical Center, and you can schedule an appointment to visit with her today, right from the comfort of your own home by picking up the phone and calling 202-527-7500 or the web address there on the screen as well, barnardmedical.org. Major insurance is available, and also on the website, you can see a full list of states where services are available as well. Dr. Rahman, can't let you go without opening up the doctor's mailbag today. We have a phenomenal question, kind of goes back to what it was Dr. Kahleova was talking about a little bit here. This is a question from Liam. Liam wants to know which plant-based foods have complete protein and how can I make sure that I'm getting all the types of protein that I need without eating meat? Great question.
Yeah, and this is such a common concern about protein. People are worried either that they're not getting enough or that they're not getting enough of the essential proteins that they need. So let's really clarify this. First of all, we don't need as much protein as we think we do. Only about 10 to 15% of our calories need to come from protein, and we can easily get that from plant foods. So a rule of thumb I like to give people is fruits are generally low, about less than 5%. Vegetables, usually around 10%. Grains, about 10 to 15%. And then when we're looking at legumes like beans, lentils, soy, we're looking at upwards of 20 to 50% of calories from protein. So we will get enough. Then the other question that comes up is there are certain amino acids that are essential. There are 9 amino acids that are essential, which means we cannot produce them. We have to ingest them from our food. And then the question is, am I getting enough of those in a plant-based diet, or do I need to mix and match foods? And traditionally, people were told that if they're following a vegan diet, they had to mix and match certain combinations of foods to make sure they got it. And we know that's not true. We can get all the amino acids we need just by eating our healthy plant-based foods. And the key here is variety, just like with anything else. Try different beans, try different legumes, throw soy in there, try different vegetables and grains, and you will get all the essential amino acids you need.
That's just it. I think people get tripped up on what you were saying. You think that you need everything at one time, but if you do eat that well-balanced meal where you have a little bit of everything on your plate, it all balances out. You're still getting exactly what it is that you need. So that's a very interesting point. Dr. Rahman, thank you so very much for your time. Appreciate your wisdom as always.
Thank you, Chuck.
All right. And if you ever have a question that you would like to ask Dr. Rahman, again, you can submit that to the doctor's mailbag. I promise you, we save each and every one that does come in. Even if we didn't get to your question today, we will try to get you an answer on an upcoming episode. So all you need to do is drop that right in the comments section now if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, or you can hop over to Twitter and tweet us at Chuck Carroll, WLC, at PCRM. Just make sure that you use the hashtag ExamRoomLive. Now, if you want a dose of inspiration today, you can check out the latest episode of the Exam Room podcast. That's the original show that kind of spawned this fun little daily adventure that we have here. So over on Apple Podcast and Spotify and Stitcher, look for the Exam Room podcast by the Physicians Committee. On the show today, it is called Weight Loss Success and Science. You're going to hear the story. You see his picture right there. This is Richard Hubbard. Richard Hubbard, as it says, lost 150 pounds. This is a guy who went from being morbidly obese to now setting his sights on running the New York City Marathon. And what makes his story so particularly unique is that his doctors prescribed him blood pressure medication and said, hey, Richard, you got to change your ways. Otherwise, you're going to be in a bad way. Well, Richard, he looked up the side effects of these medications and he says, wait a minute. I would rather not take these. I understand that I might need them, but I'd rather not. So give me 6 months to try to get my health in order. And he leaves the doctor's office that very night, starts searching around for answers, eventually stumbles upon a plant-based diet. 6 months later, goes back to the doctor. The doctor is just amazed at the success that Richard has had. And he says, well, I never thought that you would ever be able to do this. But alas, here is Richard as this incredible success story. You see him there today. I mean, look at this. The shirt says it all. Trained, insane, vegan gains. I mean, this guy is he's a marathon running machine at the moment. Just a phenomenal story. And really, during our conversation, we really also get the opportunity to give you some insight on what it's like to be morbidly obese and just trapped in that enormous frame and be so woefully addicted to food. It was nice to hear his experiences and then to be able to compare them with my own and then, just kind of figure out why it can be so difficult for people to break that vicious cycle. So it's a really inspiring 40-minute interview. And if you get a chance, please check that out. Head over to Apple Podcast or Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast. Look for the Exam Room podcast by the Physicians Committee. Hit that subscribe button. And if you would be so kind as to leave a 5-star rating, we would greatly appreciate it. Coming up on the show tomorrow, Dr. Neil Barnard will be back along with Dr. Jim Loomis. We're going to have ourselves a Friday free-for-all with the mailbag, a show devoted entirely to your questions and their answers. So load us up right now. Post yours for Drs. Barnard and Loomis in the comments section, or you can tweet them to us with the hashtag ExamRoomLive. But for today, that's all the time that we have. My thanks again to Dr. Hana Kahleova and Dr. Vanita Rahman for joining us today, and a debt of gratitude to those behind the scenes pulling the strings to make everything happen. Greatly appreciate you guys and my exam roomies who tune in faithfully every day. We could not do this without you as well. On behalf of everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks so very much for watching, and until tomorrow, stay safe, take a stand, and keep it plant-based.